Hi there, everyone. This is Lorie coming to you from West Central Women's Resource Center, actually from my home, but on behalf of the center. And I'm here today with Sandra Delaronde, and we're going to talk a little bit today about the inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And so I want to start by thanking Sandra, and I'll invite you to introduce yourself, Sandra.
Thank you, Lorie. So my name is Sandra Delaronde, and I reside in the Red River, in the homeland of the Métis Nation and Treaty 1 territory with water sourced from Shoal Lake 40. I'm originally from the PA and was a young girl at the time. Helen Betty Osborne was murdered over 50 years ago. And so really what had happened after has really been, and how the support my mother provided to the friends of Helen Betty Osborne has really informed the work that I do and how I've lived my life. And so I've been co-chair of the MMIWG Manitoba Coalition since, I think it's 2014, so a while. And I run and manage my own business, and that's about it.
Well, that's a lot. Thanks so much for being with me here today, Sandra, and for all the work that you've done on this inquiry. We know, everyone I think in the country by now probably knows that thousands of Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people have gone missing or have been murdered in this country over a number of years. Why do you think it was so important for Canada to invest in a national inquiry into MMIWG?
I think it has been important, and even more so today. In July 2nd, 2020, we are faced with a global pandemic of a virus, but we also know that since colonization, that Indigenous women have been subjected to a pandemic of violence, colonial violence, systemic violence, and violence within our homes and communities. So the response, the system's response to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited people has not been very good. If there is a response, I mean, when we compare that to the to the non-Indigenous people that go missing or murdered, the system's response is much different.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we see that every day in media.
We do see it every day, and also in terms of calling the inquiry, I think that the media has been in many ways responsible for the continued degradation of Indigenous women and girls, and really provide a mirror into how society sees us, and then what is the impact of that on young women and girls.
Absolutely. So you worked on the inquiry from here in Manitoba. How would you describe the role that the Manitoba MMIWG Coalition played in the national inquiry?
Well, I think we probably were a bit of a fire, or to ensure that the inquiry really was responsive to the voices of families and survivors. And, because families and survivors had lobbied for 20 years to have an inquiry. And once the government had called it an inquiry, we knew that this was going to be our only chance, probably in our lifetimes, probably in our grandchildren's lifetime, to speak to the issues that Indigenous women and girls face every day. So it was important that the inquiry centered the voices of Indigenous women and girls, the families and survivors. And so our role as a coalition, as an advocacy organization that was really, made up of many organizations within Manitoba, within Winnipeg, and in northern Manitoba, was to take the inquiry itself to task, for that work, and also to provide support to families and survivors that participated in the inquiry. And then finally, we were able to, as a coalition, gain standing for the inquiry. So we were able to provide questions and raise our concerns throughout those inquiries, whether they were institutions like the RCMP or Child and Family Services, those systems that definitely impact this situation.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to do that and present our findings or our concerns as a party with standing. And then we thought, okay, good, our job is done. But it wasn't.
Not quite. No.
Not quite. Then, because the inquiry did come up with 231 legal imperatives, I think, there were some areas that they were short on, partly because of time, and the whole, but I can say that the inquiry itself probably has made the boldest statement of any inquiry in Canada, and that is that Canada and its province and territories are guilty of genocide. And it's not couched in any type of like cultural genocide or gender genocide. It's just genocide. And that's a term that's recognized internationally and scares a lot of people in this country because, we're not racist. We, every institution does its best to ensure equality, equity, and diversity. So to be called out on the question of genocide really scared a lot of people and took the Prime Minister 24 hours to accept that term. And so then we, waited for the government to announce will be governments, federal and provincial governments, that they would be implementing the terms, the legal imperatives, which the calls to justice are. And they didn't. So, our role then in the past year has been to continue to lobby and make it known that this was not going away, that we had worked too long, to leave the families with just another report. We needed to ensure that for those families and for future generations that action is taken, and we say to governments, this could be your legacy, that,
Yeah.
7 generations from now, people can point to this time and say, this is when things started to change. And this is when our country got better for all people, and that is still, the dream, right? That let's work together to ensure that, when our great grandchildren are studying history, that they'll go, oh yeah, this is where we could start to walk our streets safely.
Right.
This is where we could sit together at the table. This is where change started. So we continue to do that work for that objective.
Yeah, I think it was so important that the word genocide was incorporated into the report from the inquiry because it called it what it was, what it is. And you're right, it does scare people, and it should. It should scare them to know that women are going missing at such an alarming rate, that and such an intentional rate, that it is a genocide, and that everyone should sit up and take notice of that. And that word makes people do that. So I think it was important that that be included. And here we are, a year away from the release of the report. It came out last June, and had, as you said, included 231 calls for justice. Have we seen any progress?
No. I'd like to say we did, but no, it has, like, for here in Manitoba and across the country, it has been, really the work of advocates, advocate organizations that, keep pushing governments to provide input into a national action plan. Because one of the clear messages that is in the inquiry report is the not for us without us. That there really had to be the inclusion of the voice of Indigenous women and girls, particularly of survivors and family members. And so we've worked this past year to try and ensure that that took place. And, the federal government announced that they would have an action plan on June 3rd, on the first year anniversary, and June 3rd came and went. But we are now in the process of establishing working groups nationally that is inclusive of provincial and territorial people, including survivors and family members, to determine what that national action plan will look like. So that is the first step. I mean, it took a while, but it's happening, and then I guess we'll see where we go from there. The work, the ongoing monitoring will have to be in place, because we know that if we don't pay attention, then it just falls.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I wish it was different, but you're absolutely true. If we don't continue to push, nothing will happen. Has there been any change at the provincial level or engagement at the provincial level to look at the calls for justice?
No, I mean, it's the same thing for the provincial government, is that there has not been any action. I mean, they have said that they responded. They have a provincial GBV committee of cabinet, but we haven't been able to access any reports or structures around that to be able to respond and ensure of its inclusivity and that its process actually identifies how they're going to, those processes and systemic issues are going to actually create change in gender-based violence in this province. So that work still needs to be done.
So still lots ahead.
Still lots ahead, yes.
So aside from government, I mean, obviously they have a very large role to play in responding to the calls for justice. There's lots of work that Canadians themselves can do, and agencies like ours, a non-Indigenous social service agency that serves women, that deals in gender-based violence every day. There's stuff that we can do. What would you say are some of the key things that organizations like ours should be focused on as we respond in our own ways to the calls for justice?
Well, I think first of all is that organizations and individuals in organizations need to read the final report of the National Inquiry. It's a huge report, but very educational. And, to see that these, like a lot of Canadians blame Indigenous women and girls for lifestyle, for the reasons why they go missing or are murdered, when in fact we look at the whole context of the situation is that women and girls have been, Indigenous women and girls have been undermined as rights holders, as matriarchs, like the whole system of governance and living in community and family since the beginning of, Canada, and continues to be entrenched in the systems that are designed to support all of us. So the systems that we're dealing with a huge systems failure. So A is to read the report, and then I think prioritize some of those recommendations that people can do at a community level. How do we create safe spaces in family and community? How do we re-educate people in terms of, one, understanding that there are systemic barriers, but also understanding that there is personal responsibility, right? And looking at, the education system, sort of even within organizations, how does your public relations material reflect or impact in terms of images or words? That are they inclusive? Are they empowering? And then if you're bringing in Indigenous women or girls into the workplace, what measures of safety or HR policy and practices are you looking at and redefining to ensure that it is an inclusive environment? So you're dealing with the strengths of a person rather than, the traumas or the weaknesses. Right. So that's always a good starting place.
That's wonderful and great advice, I think, for many of us. And I know I have done my reading of the report of the inquiry, and I agree it's a very educational document, and I would hope and wish that every Canadian would read it, because I think it would begin to shift the attitudes that many have towards the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up here? This has been really helpful.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge yourself and West Central Women's Resource Center for being an ally, for supporting the work of the coalition. And, I think that other organizations or governments can take a look at the work that you do, that West Central does, in terms of how to be a good ally. And so I would really recommend people to come talk to you for that, right? And keep doing the good work. And I think together we can see some change in our lifetime.
Thank you. We're very committed to seeing that change too. So we'll continue to walk with you and do what we can to help raise the voices that hopefully will one day be heard by our government.
Yes.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today, Sandra, and we'll be in touch again soon. As you know, we'll continue to work together.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Sandra.
Okay. Thanks.